So welcome those who are listening in today. My name is Michelle Faithful and I'm the Events and Community Relations Manager at Compass Housing, and I'm also part of the Hunter SDG Taskforce Committee. And today in this webinar we're focusing on SDG 13, which is good health and wellbeing. And the topic is managing culture through COVID. 2020 continues to be a challenging year for many of us. Mental health is becoming the most pressing issue worldwide. A large proportion is also working from home still. And it looks like this will be the new normal for a lot of organisations in the future. Positive workplace culture is the reason people stay in jobs. It's really about the money. So how do we maintain a sense of culture when we're not physically together? And especially when many of us are struggling to keep our mental health on track in each of our isolated environments at the moment. So today we have some special guests who can give us some insight into what's happening at the coalface with mental health services in the Hunter at the moment and how we can manage sustainable workplace culture while we navigate this global pandemic. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Brendan Flynn, Acting Executive Director, Hunter New England Mental Health Services, and Jonathon Holt, who's the Acting General Manager of Hunter New England Health Mental Health Services, and Alexandria Joy, Minimalist, Leader and Culture Healer. Dr. Flynn is a psychiatrist with subspecialty qualifications in psychiatry of old age. Jonathon has an allied health background with a Master's in Business Administration. With over 300 inpatient beds and an extensive community team network, the mental health service provides clinical treatment and care for people with serious psychiatric illness. The mental health service has a strong focus on quality improvement and is at the forefront of the use of clinical redesign strategies that are linked to improve quality of care and engagement with the community. AJ is an optimist and believes in a bright future and the abilities of companies and their people to build it together. AJ teaches leaders how to create healthy, optimistic, sustainable workplace cultures by making a simple 10-degree shifts. With a bold goal to help leaders grow their consciousness and create cultures where people grow wiser, happier, safer, and more free than when they arrived. AJ is also the author of multiple books, including a series of 3 pocket books of optimism to help shift your mood on a daily basis. Before we start the conversation, we've got a few more attendees who have come in, and we will have a short Q&A after the presenters have spoken. So if you have any questions, if you like to use the chat as opposed to the Q&A, it's a little bit easier to manage. So pop any questions in there and we can actually shoot them through and have a bit of a chat afterwards. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Brendan and Jonathon first off. Thank you.
Good on you. Thank you, Michelle, and good morning to everybody. I should just check you can hear me okay. Sounds like you can. All right, thanks. So look, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us along to talk about workplace culture and mental health's role in that, and it's obviously an interconnected topic. From our point of view, I thought it might be useful to just briefly introduce what we see as some of the current issues relating to workplace culture in mental health and a brief overview, I guess, of what an acute psychiatric service can do and sometimes may struggle to do but can assist others in achieving, in getting better outcomes for particularly, I think, for people who, as you say, in the new world that we're in, are more isolated and working from home. So I might just start off a little bit, if you like, with the issues around what we are seeing on the ground in relation to stresses in the community since March 2020 in the Newcastle region in our new pandemic world. I think it's worth saying that not since after World War I, so not really in living memory, has this community, or indeed any other community in most of the world, not all, but most of the world, had to manage the sort of unique stresses that come around with a pandemic. And those stresses obviously are personal, social, financial, relationship stressors, and workplace stresses, because everything at work, either what you're doing or how you're doing it or where you do it, changes. So what we are seeing, and we had expected this, but hadn't really seen it happen probably until the last 6 weeks or so, is a understandable and really quite marked increase in demand for mental health services amongst a large cohort of the population who have what I would call undifferentiated distress. And what I mean by that is we need to explore, is this driven by anxiety? Is it driven by loneliness? Is it related to financial stress? And I guess one of the things we know about mental health, and it's a good news story, is that because we've addressed stigma and because we've addressed a lot of barriers to access for mental health services, the other side of the coin is that a mental health service can, if you like, become the funnel for a lot of help seeking and wayfinding for individuals who are distressed. So we're expecting to see that increase in presentations, and we are, particularly in young people under 18, that's been really very marked. The other thing I would mention is that it then becomes a conversation with individuals that we really need to make sure we're doing in a way that is listening and that's empathic, of trying to tease out whether or not this is something that a service that's really set up and trained and funded to look after people with serious psychiatric or serious psychiatric related safety issues is the right service for someone who has, let's say, a common example might be COVID-related anxiety, that whether or not it technically meets the diagnosis of an anxiety disorder may be well managed by a psychologist or by a general practitioner or by fairly straightforward social and psychological strategies. And I guess that's what we're seeing in our service, is a real need to think about how to have those conversations with people where we say, yep, this is new for you, it's distressing. What's the right place and what's the right direction to send you in? So I might stop there. I'm sorry I've gone on and on, but I might hand over to Jonathon. And what I haven't addressed yet, Michelle, and I should have, is just how to tie that into workplace culture.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brendan. I think that's probably the real definition of what we're seeing here, is that when you look along the continuum of mental health, and we all have to look after our mental health and our mental wellness, is really a broader term that refers to our own social, psychological and emotional well-being. And all of us will be impacted to differing degrees. And I think that's probably what we're talking around, is how do we each manage our own mental health, and how do we look after the mental health of one another, whether that's our colleagues, our family, our peers, whatever that may be. Because if we don't manage our mental health and become mental ill health, and then mental ill health leads to mental illness. And as Brendan was talking about, there's differentiating between those that need mental health services to those who may be struggling with their mental health, as we were talking about. Recognising that we need to continue to break down the stigma around both mental health and mental illness, and are we having those conversations? First of all, are we being real with ourselves in relation to how we're doing, and how do we be real with one another? Recognising that a lot of the mechanisms that we rely on from a mental health perspective, whether that is coming to work, seeing people face to face, socialising, physical activity, have effectively been reduced or taken away. So a lot of our tools for managing that have changed. And I think, as Brendan was saying, we've seen a broader impact. And if we look at those that are more broad impact, we haven't experienced a pandemic for well over 100 years. We're looking at those that are impacted by reduced contact. We're having a look at those that are impacted, and it may be yourself, maybe a family member, who are struggling with the indirect impacts or the direct impacts, such as the economic uncertainty, the loss of income, the loss of business, or simply the loss of status for some that comes with that, particularly when we talk about culture. We're looking at people who are struggling, and we need to make the intrinsic link between people who are just not our employees, but they're people who have families at home, so the family pressures of even getting enough toilet paper, to managing the kids' homeschooling, to all those processes. In addition to that, managing people who have vulnerable health, whether that's people's parents, whether that's their kids, whether that's themselves. Some of the other vulnerable groups, I think, just before we move on, are those who may struggle to change. So we're getting people to work from home, having to adapt to technology, having to work from home in isolation for those that may be more extroverted than others, The challenges of accessing reliable information is probably one of the preeminent issues that we've found with the information overload. There is always a contradicting opinion, which creates uncertainty and then once again feeds into anxiety and other challenges. In addition to that, I think it's around some of our vulnerable people groups and maybe some of your vulnerable staff. Those with housing insecurity, maybe around people from cultural and linguistic diverse backgrounds, Aboriginal people, a whole range of different groups, recognising that social dynamics have changed within those groups. In addition to that, what we're finding too more broadly is a cohort within the adolescent and the teenage group who are particularly struggling. We're starting to see that in our numbers of presentations as well, who are highly social, highly interactive, and probably really accustomed to quite a stable world in which they live. So that's having a significant impact. And then in addition to that too, talking around, we've come up with this concept of social distancing, but really we refer to it as physical distancing because it's the physical distance that we want to maintain, not so much the social distancing. So that's probably the broad sort of overview of where we're at. Recognising too, the evidence says that those that are more impacted more broadly are those with pre-existing anxiety disorders or mental health illnesses. Our healthcare workers internationally we've seen are impacted by a whole range of factors being on the coalface, including actually managing their own emotions, seeing people day in, having to be constantly prepared. In addition to that too, I mean, we've seen in Italy and a whole lot of different places having to potentially make a moral decision on who and how they treat people. So I think that's the impact. The other broader group worth referring to are those in quarantine. So obviously those in quarantine are significantly impacted. We've seen that in Victoria. And then also too from a workforce point of view, those that are unemployed and in a casual workplace. So that's probably the broader impact. Brendan, you want to talk about?
I would just add another thing, and I guess it relates again to workplace culture, but also for people who are vulnerable and in particular employment-wise, so someone who is not working, that a large part of, and I think you mentioned this at the start, Michelle, that money is not the reason people go to work. A large part of it is to do with the intrinsic satisfaction of the job, the opportunistic socialising, and a big part of it is identity. And some significant parts of those are challenged by going to an office only one day a week or going to somewhere that is mostly empty or being asked to do it entirely from home. We know that suits some people as well. But I think, so to go deep psychiatric for a moment, so Freud had a great saying, and Freud's a very interesting character, and we could talk about all day some of the strengths and weaknesses there, but he talked about the essential human needs of to love and to work. The idea that work is very much an important part of what we do. And then it also raises the question for me of people who are not working and whether or not that is through lack of employment opportunities or health issues or many of the population that we serve are in that situation, that what often constitutes activity or identity is then often run by a non-government organisation. So there's the opportunity, for example, to socialise, to meet, to do meaningful things. A lot of that stuff got shut down fairly early on in the pandemic as well. So it's not just people who are working who potentially lost those opportunities, it's across the whole community, and that particularly older people. So retirees, for example, the classic sort of activities, if I think about my extended family, a lot of that has been curtailed just by the requirement to keep away from people and not catch the virus. So,
and can I just jump in really quickly? And I think often we assume that our home is a safe place, and we need to recognise for some people it's not.
Yeah.
And I think we need to recognise that there's a whole range of people who are in a domestic violence or an abusive situation, and we've seen increased numbers of that over this time. So it's just something to be aware of. We never know who those people are, because it doesn't always look evident on the surface. So there's something else to just be aware of, is that we assume that the home is a safe place for people, but not for everyone it's not. Sorry, man.
So Michelle, I guess from our point of view, that's our sort of opening or initial comments. I know there's a Q&A session coming later, but is that, I'm just wondering if there are other specific things that might be helpful for the audience for us to address at the moment.
I think we're on the right track here. Listening, that's very interesting to hear, your perspective on what's happening in the community at the moment. I think AJ will certainly do, I guess, talk about the other side of that and things that we can do in our organisations to help people. I think just keep the conversation flowing and just a little bit here and see what comes of it. We'll have some questions as well. We can mix them in as we feel we need to.
Right. I do like the description, AJ, I heard about your optimism, and we probably shouldn't underplay that, because not only is there cause for optimism related to the pandemic, I think that that is often what keeps our staff going in a very challenging environment. And a part of our role is to model that with the people that we serve. That and a classic thing, even that well and truly predates COVID, is if we are working with someone who has, for example, a serious mental illness, trying to change the discussion to be based on strengths rather than deficits is really important. And we know that that's what consumers prefer, and we know that that's actually what staff prefer as well. Even though when you sort of pick up a dusty textbook, it will have a list of the things that someone with disorder X cannot do. That's actually in the real world not particularly helpful. So I think the optimism stuff is really important. Yeah.
And I guess it's probably by way of background. I guess probably we'll just give a quick overview of what we've done from a service perspective, because that may speak into some other things as well. And I think we all have these pandemic plans that were on the shelf that we thought, after we saw SARS and some other things earlier on in the decade, we never really thought we'd see a pandemic to this level. So this has really forced us to really dust off that and rewrite it and rethink the way we deliver care during pandemic. And for all intents and purposes, you can see across both Hunter New England and across New South Wales, we've done it to good effect. We've got really, really good at managing people who have presented with COVID, providing them the support and the care that they need whilst in isolation, and our contact tracing has probably been second to none, which we've seen. From a mental health service point of view, we've obviously had a look at, we have systems in place on how we manage people in the inpatient setting now and how we provide them with care. And we've taken a really strong focus in our community where a lot of our care delivers, and we've moved a lot of that into telehealth and virtual healthcare, which is, we often talk around internally, we will often say that our patients or our clients aren't ready, but often it's us as staff that are willing to make that step. And it's interesting when you're forced to do that, how that transition can occur. So there's a lot of really positive things that are coming out of this for the delivery of healthcare services, and I guess all service types more broadly. So we've taken really quite a proactive step in doing that, and the way we deliver our care has moved into that medium and has done so with really quite good effect. We've done a lot of work around making resources available, making sure that people are aware of their options, and we're continuing to look at innovative ways in which we can facilitate care away from hospital. So what are our alternatives to ED? How do we provide care in the community? Recognising that we see people still with it across a broad spectrum. And recognising too, as a part of that too, I think a strong focus of that has been on our older population, recognising that we've seen a lot of probably chaos is probably a broad description around our aged care facilities, and how do we provide the care that's required, the support that's required to not only our consumers but our patients and their families, and helping them navigate the system. So that's probably quite a high level overview of sort of what's happening from our space. So. And I think probably just to really touch on is our organisation is like any other organisation. We have to work with our employees, and I think working with our employees who have been potentially on the coalface, and I use the word potentially because we haven't had the numbers that we have had, but in essence trying to deliver our usual service but being prepared for something different. And now being 6 months in, we recognise that there's probably a sense of fatigue's probably a strong word, but I think we're all living with that constant uncertainty, and it comes to a point where it can become a little bit overwhelming, where people, you may have seen in your own organisation, have not taken leave because they've had to cancel their trips and all those sort of bits and pieces. And as we talked about earlier, managing their own personal life. So it's really around, we've looked at how we can support our staff and work with them as well around supporting them in developing their resilience, how we work generously and recognise the goodwill of staff and how they look out for one another as a part of that. So challenging but exciting times all in one.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much, guys. I might hand over to AJ to respond to that, I think.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Just unmuting myself for a minute. And it was really interesting listening to you both, and I couldn't agree more. I think the loss of status, that whole concept of physical distancing, not social distancing, is super important right now. And I think it's really important right now because October is also Mental Health Awareness Month. And so we're really coming into a month where we will be talking about it a lot more. One of the things I think is great about COVID is it has normalised talking about, are you okay? And talking about that in the workplace much more than we used to in the past. And I kind of want to talk about 3 things we can do today, or what I see and what I work with CEOs, leaders and organisations. And so those 3 are, number 1, to stay optimistic. Number 2, to build psychologically safe workplaces. And number 3, to just start by making small shifts. Because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with, well, how do I do some of this stuff? And I'm seeing more and more staff that are challenged by the current circumstances. And as leaders of that, how do I support them? And it's not just EAPS necessarily. So it's not just sending someone to EAP or, you know, getting them a counselling session. This is ongoing and everyone in my team all at once. So how do I handle that? So first, I think a little bit of why. And the fact is that coronavirus, I believe, has actually given us the biggest test of empathy that we've ever had in workplaces all around the world. We really have had to put our empathy hats on as leaders and really come from a sense of understanding of what's going on for all of the beautiful humans that we have. And so I think it amplified behaviours. It's kind of amplified what was already existing in some teams and cultures, and some things that maybe could have gone under the radar before through the way we've had to work through COVID and the stresses that it's put on us, as in, you know, will we have a business today or tomorrow? Am I going to lose my job? My partner is maybe going to lose their job. Now I'm working from home and my kids are homeschooling. And so I've got the stress of needing 5 computers and everyone switched on and all of us talking and all of that together. And so I think our human failings have really been put to the test. And I know most of my clients have really, in some ways or others, been really struggling with it. And I work with a lot of CEOs and leaders, and particularly actually throughout the pandemic, a lot of my clients were male and quite senior in all sorts of industries. And some of them said, how do I paint a picture of a brighter future and keep my team working together when we really are in a dire way, or I really don't know what tomorrow will bring? And perhaps I haven't been that great at using my empathy muscle. So for some of them, they said it was easy when everyone was here just at work together and I could tap someone on the shoulder and have a chat to them. But now I have to make the point of ringing them at home or talking to them and asking them questions about how they're feeling. And then if they tell me that they're a bit anxious or upset by it, I'm not sure what to do because I haven't had those kind of conversations before. So it has been quite challenging. I've also seen much more prevalence and I think more honesty and transparency from the leaders I work with in the fact that they have found themselves turning to other substances and things like that. So I've had quite a few leaders actually say to me, you know, I'm struggling because I'm using alcohol a lot, or whatever it might be. And so just starting to notice some of their behaviours exacerbated by the situation. And so that's you know, been good and bad, I think, in a way, or challenging for people to manage, but also with awareness, a really great opportunity to explore what is it about my work that I love, what don't I love, what in our company works well and what doesn't. And how much of the stuff do we just do because we always have? And so I think it's provided some people a bit of breathing space and an opportunity to go, maybe we can change some of the ways we do things. I've heard of a few companies in Sydney I've worked with already selling off some of their office space or stopping renting some of the floors that they had and consolidating them and going, do you know what, in reality, people might come into the office 1 or 2 days a week in future, and we might maintain them working from home the rest of the time. So those kind of changes are quite large for organisations, whether they're big or small, to deal with. And I think also during times of having just our normal daily liberties in life and in business stretched, you know, having to quarantine from home, not being able to travel and see, you know, relatives and people we love. I know my sister-in-law just got to go and visit their new grandchild in Adelaide this week, and she was born during COVID. And so for families and people and workplaces, that's been really stretching us to a hilt, I think. And so let's have a think about what can we do and some of the things I've been encouraging in workplaces. I'm really happy for people to chat in the chat box. And so if you've got questions for me along the way, or if you agree, say yes. If you don't, say no, and we can thrash that out a bit as we go. I like a bit of interaction. So the first point I wanted to talk about that I mentioned before was to stay optimistic. And I have a bit of a naughty word. I like playing on words. So instead of optimistic, I say optimistic, because I really want people to be up. And I don't mean just be Pollyanna and like, yeah, the day is great, but really think about what are the healthy habits and things that I can do that I know support me to start the day at least in the most up manner I can. And I think we have to be realistic that there is no going back to normal. Lots of people are waiting for the world to turn back to normal, and I just don't think that's going to happen. This is our reality now. And so we must learn to be adaptable and flexible. We have to allow ourselves to prepare for this new normal. Yeah, what is normal, right? And so we have to not succumb, I guess, to the blackness of negativity, which is easier said than done. I totally respect and get that. But to just notice, where's my energy when I wake up, and what are the things that give me joy? Maybe it's taking your dog for a walk. Maybe it's listening to a bit of groovy music on the way to work in the car, or dropping the kids off, or whatever it is. Do whatever you need to kind of at least start your day in the most optimistic way possible. And I've seen it with my own parents. And you were saying before, gentlemen, about aged care facilities and that sort of thing. My parents are still at home, but both quite senior and unwell. And so I watch how much their amount of use of the news impacts on their behaviour and their well-being and their mental health. And so I'm always trying to encourage them, can we watch something nice today? And so my mum will get a video of Mamma Mia out or something and watch that and sing along. And I watch how much more positive they are the next day, because they've actually fed themselves with something positive rather than kind of getting stuck in the doom and gloom. So I'd encourage you, and in workplaces, to go maybe in a meeting. I actually facilitated something for medical practitioners in New Zealand last week, and on Zoom, as we started, there was 18 people on the call. We all introduced ourselves and then said, what's one thing we're grateful for today? And so maybe right now in the chat box, everyone could type in, what's something you're grateful for today? One thing, anything at all. For me, it would be the sunrise. And I know, Michelle, you saw the same sunrise that I did. You know, I'm always super grateful that there he is. He's risen again, right? So maybe put in the chat box something that you're grateful for. And that's something simple you could do in a team meeting. You could get everyone to state something like that. You'd be amazing what a mood lifter that can be. The second point I wanted to talk about is how we need to build psychological safety. And as I said, I work a lot with leaders. So I'm always looking at, you know, the fish rots from the head. The leaders set the tone of a culture. And when we're talking about culture, it really is important for leaders to understand that they're the custodians of the culture. They really do set the mood, and they allow the behaviours or disallow behaviours that either make or break that culture. So it's really important for leaders to take seriously and be accountable for the role that they play in creating safe workplaces that are psychologically safe. And so people have to feel that they're able to be vulnerable at work. They have to feel able to say, do you know what, I'm really struggling today, and to have some discussion around that. And I heard a great interview with Simon Sinek the other day, and he was talking about when a very traumatic event happened in his sister's life. And he went to his boss and had a discussion about, do you know what, my sister really needs some support right now. And I just want to know if it's okay if over the next 6 months, if she rings me and I just need to get up and go, I just want you to know that I'm going to do that because she's my first priority. And is that okay? And his boss was like, completely understand, and that's fine. And he said he only needed to do it twice, but it was so good to have had the conversation and for his boss to understand that. And so we as leaders have to think about, are we creating environments that allow our staff to have those kind of conversations and not feel like that they will be put down or in trouble or that their job's at risk over things like that. And so I used to be a director at WorkCover New South Wales, and I worked here for about 7 years. And what I found super interesting was when I began my work there, the primary amount of injuries and deaths and hazards and things like that that were presenting and that were on the statistics, you know, they all have humans and families behind them. But most of them were slips, trips and falls, electrocutions and tractor rollovers. That was kind of the big glut of the most injury statistics that we saw. And over the 7 years that I've worked there and then beyond, since I have no longer, but I've watched the statistics grow, they've all become psychological issues. So there's still some minor slips, trips, falls and things like that. But most of that, we've been able to put a lot of WHS barriers and things in place and risk assessments, but we're not so good at managing the psychological safety and the mental health and well-being. And so we've seen lots of bullying and harassment and depression and anxiety, and those stats really blow out in our workplaces. And so we really do need to be thinking about, what are we doing for each other as humans, and how are we building a sense of community in our workplaces and in the culture that people are able to address these challenges early on and not let them grow. And so what we've found with COVID is a real challenge around trust. That's what I've found with the companies that I've worked with, because people are starting to work from home a lot more. And so bosses are like, how do I check that they're doing their work, right? Do I need them on Zoom online all day? Do I need to see that they've logged on? Do I want their timesheet? You know, how do I check on people? And that's where I really go. This is where trust is the most important part of a really healthy workplace culture. Trust is the bedrock. And so we have to start with that. We can't get high performance without trust. And if we're worrying about whether people are clocked on or off or logged onto their computer, then that's not a display of trust. Yeah. And so I really believe that we need to do things to build trust. One of the easy things to build trust when you're in a workplace together and physically together is what happens in the cracks, what happens between meetings. You know, it's the little chat in the corridor and going, hey, Bill, I heard your dad was unwell. How's he doing right now? Oh, thanks for asking, right? It's those little conversations over a cup of tea or water that really build a lot of our trust. And while we're all working from home and we're just getting on for the allocated Zoom time, we're not getting that stuff that's in the cracks. So we're not getting that social interactivity, and we're not, I guess, bringing our humanity to each other and to work. And so that's a real challenge. I think workplaces need to be smart in how they can support people to still interaction and have discussions, and whether that's some kind of chat group or a WhatsApp or something like that, whether it's trivia nights. I've worked with a Sri Lankan company recently, and they are having a trivia night once a week, which they started out of COVID. And they do that with their families. So they sit in their lounge rooms on Zoom and everyone gets to play. And so they've met each other's kids and their dogs and their pets and all those sorts of things. And they just have an hour of kind of fun each week. And that actually came out of the employees saying they really missed going to work and they missed their workmates. So, you know, it could be unique and different for every workplace. You have to kind of work out what works for you and how do we help people still get that interactivity. Because it doesn't happen on screen. You know, we can all say we like each other here right now, but it's still kind of a bit formal, right? We don't actually get into that sort of nice conversation that happens casually or over a coffee. And I noticed it with my own work. A lot of the time I would go out and meet with clients and we'd have a cuppa and have a chat before we got into the bulk of the meeting. Now we just get on Zoom and do the meeting part. So a lot of that polite nicety, and that friend raising and trust building is gone. So it's really important to keep working on that. And remembering that being online all day is no proof of hard work. You know, you don't want to know that people have been online all day. And actually, that's incredibly unhealthy. And what I've found with a lot of people is going, my God, I've never felt so brain stressed as I have sitting in 6 Zoom meetings a day, because that, you know, is really taxing on the brain, and you're not getting up and walking around and seeing people and those sorts of things. So be really smart about not over scheduling too much of that online interaction. And if people say, do you know what, I'm going to take 2 hours off in the middle of the day and go and have a bio break and do a walk and those things, I think that's great for the mental health of your employees, and you should be kind of encouraging it. So stop checking in with emails all the time, and stop using how many hours someone's online as kind of the proof that they're doing the work. And then lastly, making small shifts. So I talk a lot about making 10-degree shifts in a whole range of areas, and I work with organisations on healing their culture. And it's an interesting word to use when you're thinking about workplaces, healing. But it really is imperative that leaders think about, how well am I as a leader? How balanced am I? And am I encouraging that in my employees? And I'm going to quickly just share a screenshot for a moment of my 10-degree shift model. Can you see that, Michelle? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can? Yeah, great, thank you. And so this is how I work with organisations. We may not do all of it, but we dip in where it's needed. So I will talk to them about physical movement. You know, are people shackled to a desk all day? How much movement do they get? How much blood flow and oxygen are they experiencing? I will talk to them about stress levels and what creates stress in your organisation, because it's different in every single one. And what are some of the mechanisms and tools that you might use, whether that be mindfulness, meditation, other stress relieving things that people might be able to use. I talk about plants. So do you eat plants? Are you surrounded by plants? There's research that shows that organisations or companies and environments that have more greens, so whether they see that out of the windows or they have plants in their environment, are 30% more productive. And I reckon that's worth going for. So do they have kind of green space, and are they eating good things? Like in our cafeteria or whatever we have, our food vending machines, is it just all sugar and stuff? Is it all just, you know, we have a morning tea and we make sure there's donuts? Or are we doing things like healthy hummus and carrot sticks? So really thinking about, what are you fueling? And if people are working from home, I know for me, in my first 3 weeks of the COVID lockdown, when it was intense, my sugar consumption went like this, and my coffee consumption, which, you know, I'm not a big coffee drinker, but suddenly it became this thing because it was the only kind of relief you got. So really to be thinking about those things. Growth mindset. So do we punish people for making mistakes? Do we look for the opportunities and look at how do we continue to grow? Are we clear in our purpose? And so for a lot of companies throughout COVID, that could have shifted. It could be we're a restaurant and our waiting staff now don't have work because we don't have people in the office or in the restaurant, sorry. And so you might be going, well, are you happy to do home deliveries? You know, are you happy to do some of these things? So what's our purpose now as an organization? How have we shifted? I've heard of a pizza company in New York who actually shifted and started using their really hot pizza ovens to melt these plastics to make masks for people, like face shields for medical industry. So, you know, can we be creative, and what's our purpose right now? To have straight talk, I think this is one of the things that's really, really super important, is are we able to have the difficult conversations when we need to? Can we speak our truth at work? And as leaders, do we encourage that? You know, do we get people to fill in their timesheet and they just put 9 to 5 every day when you know that's not the hours they work? Did we say to them, hey, actually, that doesn't look like an accurate representation. What's going on there? Can I have a chat to you about it? Or do we gloss over it, sign it, and let it go through the gatekeeper? So are we able to have conversations? Shared values. Do we know why we come to work each day, and do we all believe the same things? And have we articulated some of those things? I think during times like COVID, actually, some of those things really do come to the forefront. And some people said they felt stronger bonds with their workmates, and often that is because they have some of those shared values. The vibe of the tribe, just like I was saying, that company from Sri Lanka really looked at their tribe vibe, and they missed that because they loved their work peers. And so they really looked for ways, how can we maintain the vibe that we have? Family first, I think COVID, more than anything ever that's happened across the board in workplaces, has brought up family first. It's really made people realise what is most important in my life, and how do we recognise that family should come first before work, and are we actually really creating safe workplaces that allow people to prioritise their family, or do we set expectations that are unreasonable and unfeasible? And lastly, community counts. Like, how do we contribute back to the community? How do we serve and share and be part of that? And I think this is where, for leaders to learn to be better at coaching and not judging, to be better at finding other ways of connecting with other organisations and looking for ways that we can communicate and relate and allow the well-being of all of us to come into play. And just, I guess, as I said, it's really been a big test of empathy. So to wrap up, because I know you want to go into Q&A now, Michelle, I think building great cultures after COVID is the job of a leader now. And as I said, this is the new normal. So it's really important we start thinking about how do we want to proceed from here, and that we need to play a long game, not just go, well, maybe it'll lift in 3 months or 6 months and things will, you know, change back. I think this is the perfect opportunity to play the long game and to say, will my employees grow out of this? Will they be better humans? Will they feel more supported? Will they love coming to work? And will they say, thank God I worked for that company during that time, because I feel like I was really cared for. And I feel like I had an opportunity also to deliver my best skills and to be supported through that. So I think this era in our world is an opportunity for us to think about how we conduct ourselves and how we treat each other. And I think human interaction is the key to all of this. And while we are on Zoom and at a distance, that can be more challenging than ever. But if we stay calm and be confident and communicate, I think we absolutely can create really healthy, happy cultures. Yeah. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, AJ. Brendan and Jonathan, have you got anything in response to that? And I think it's some pretty interesting
Sounds
stuff.
like a debate.
We like the 10-degree shift model, AJ. It's a sort of very appealing way of thinking about some of these issues, and I think that is just that very comment about people looking back and saying, look, I feel really, really fortunate I was with this organisation. That's what we're aiming for, and what I guess I watched Four Corners last night. I don't know if anybody else online, but it was fairly concerning. And I guess the initial response that many people may have is, look, I was fortunate to have a job, but we want to be able to do better than that. We want to be able to say I was fortunate to work, you know, for this particular organisation. And I think AJ captured that well, and ways to try and make that happen. So.
If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat now. We've got a few minutes left, but I do have one that's probably more related to the health system, I guess. And you mentioned the increase in telehealth, and the future of that going forward. Do you think that will relieve pressure on the health system in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's another tool in the toolkit. It's not going to be a full replacement. I think. But it'll be another medium that we can use, and I think particularly with younger people, people right across the age groups. To be honest, we're used to FaceTime now. We're used to having interaction with the screen. We're used to connecting, and I think COVID's really even forced maybe some of the the late adopters to get online. So how do we use that? And I think for some people it gives them an element of control. So some people don't like face-to-face, some people are used to screen, they can hang up at any point, whatever that may be. The challenge for us is also to making sure that, like we see on Zoom, you can put a marvellous screen drop on behind you and people can think you're on the beach or wherever it may be. But with anything like that, and the same goes for the workplace, is what's behind that backdrop. So how do we get collaborative history, as we call it, or how do you do that with your employees to know that the picture that you're not being presented with, well, actually, the picture you are presenting is the true picture. Is there not something else going on behind that?
That's a great point. That's a good metaphor really of the backdrop, isn't it? It's
But yeah, yes, in relieving pressure, providing us with other opportunities, and recognising a lot of people work and we expect them to come to appointments. How do we do healthcare more flexible?
The other thing, if I can mention this, that I think is really interesting about telehealth, we don't have an answer to this yet, but it's a reason for a lot of people's pre-COVID reluctance, and there's many converts, is that around a third of every improvement that is seen in any healthcare interaction, and this is true for surgical interventions, it's true for seeing a therapist, it's true for seeing a GP, around a third of that measurably is about the relationship with the clinician. And so a lot of us, and I would count myself, my work is in older age psychiatry clinically. I was thinking, how am I going to get that connection and that trust online? Because I know that's actually really important for this person to do well. But I don't think we've demonstrated that that's the sort of issue that we feared it might be. So I think that it's a good news story. There's not data around this yet. There's not a lot of research on it, but I actually think it's really interesting, particularly, and again, for the older person cohort, they're actually required, don't want to go out and required to sort of, avoid public places in order to protect themselves. So they're actually more enthusiastic, I think, than we thought they would be around the uptake of the technology. So there may be people online who have had that experience themselves who want to comment, but I think that whole trust with the clinician stuff is not necessarily the barrier that certainly I admit I feared it would be before we started using it this broadly.
Bit of a silver lining there for
yeah.
Got to find them where we can, can't we?
Yes.
AJ, I see you've got a question there.
Yeah, I see that, and I couldn't agree more with your comments about the aged. I know my parents now have their medical appointments via the phone with their doctor, and they love it. They say, "Oh, the doctor rang me today," like it's a long lost friend. They quite like that level of contact and the ease of doing it, because it's a hassle kind of getting them to a health facility. So I see your question there, Enia. I'm just going to read it for those that might be listening to audio later. And it says, I agree that a workplace should be a psychologically safe place to work. However, not every employer is a counsellor or therapist. At what point should employees take responsibility for their own mental health and wellbeing? Great question. And I totally agree. I think it's really important for leaders and people, managers in companies, to understand that they're not a therapist or a psychologist, and nor should they profess to be, right? And so they have to know where their boundary lies and to know when to refer someone to go and see a health professional. Absolutely. But they do have a responsibility, and that's actually stated in law. You do have a responsibility for the safety and well-being of your employees. So managers can't skirt that responsibility. They absolutely must be checking on the well-being, and that they need to do risk assessments. And a risk assessment can also include, are people psychologically being impacted by the current environment? And they should be having discussions around that. Yes, they shouldn't be counsellors or therapists, but they can't really shirk that responsibility. And I think that's what all leaders need to understand. It's easy to tell people what to do and to go, I'm the boss, you'll do what I say. But you have to understand that you're a custodian as well for the culture and for the well-being. Having said that, yes, absolutely, individuals should also be responsible for their own mental health. And I think this is where awareness and discussions like this, like mental health, like Black Dog does a lot of their work, the Are You OK Day, the more we can make that the norm, that people can actually raise, hey, I'm not coping right now. Yeah. That's where they need to take responsibility and to go, who do I need in my support team? You know, or what's my red flag that something's starting to get out of whack? You know, am I starting to consume more substances? Am I trying to escape things? Am I avoiding, or am I starting to go more insular? I don't want to go out now. I don't want to leave the house, or whatever the trigger or the thing for you to notice yourself. I do think people have to start being aware and take responsibility for that. And the best time to do it is not always when you're in the crux of it. So I always say, even when you're well, I will say to my doctor, take a scan of me now, like what's good and how do I maintain that? So the same thing with mental health. You know, what are the things that make me feel good? Like I was saying, a walk in the water in the morning, drinking lots of water, staying positive, surrounding myself with good people or a good environment, thinking about that. And then how do I maintain it? And how do I notice when that's slipping? That's our personal responsibility for all of us as employees. But I still believe leaders do have quite a serious role to play in organisations in maintaining that. And most organisations I say that I walk into, even if I haven't met them really before, I'm a bit like a canary in a coal mine. Like you can walk in and go, oh, there's something icky over there, right? You can sense, you know, as humans, we're quite clever at going, oh, something feels a bit strained or awkward or whatever. And so a manager or leader should be able to check in every day with their team and get a sense of where's everyone at and what do I need to do to make sure that we're, you know, in the right place to play hard in whatever game we're playing.
Not always easy to do when someone's sitting at home, but yes. So Kim's had a question. It could be for either of you. Can you provide some more examples? And you probably just covered this, AJ, anyway. But Brendan and Jonathon might have something to add to this. Can you provide more examples of great mental health protection practices in workplaces? It'd be great to hear some more ideas and strategies.
Do you want me to go first, AJ, or?
Go for it.
I will. So I guess that you could divide that into formal and informal programs, and there's a lot of formal programs out there. I think what underlies and what is good practice for both places where people are trying to do the right thing in terms of mental health protection at work, whether or not that's formalised or not. And I think this has already been mentioned, but feeling that it's okay to bring in your, not, you know, with I guess the comfort of the employee, discussions around what's going in their life at work, and having a manager who indicates that they can handle the answer of how you're going today if the answer is I'm not going so well. So often people ask that question and they don't really want to hear the answer, or they don't ask it because they're actually not okay with managing someone who is emotionally distressed. One of the most useful bits of advice that I got many, many years ago, you know, and sometimes I think a t-shirt saying this would be very useful, which is the other way around of the normal phrase, which is don't just do something, but sit there. It's actually really important to sit with people who are distressed or people who are anxious or angry, and not immediately grab the phone or grab some sort of distraction or go for a solution, or the risk with doctors of grabbing the script pad, but rather sit with the distress. And it's actually quite a sophisticated skill. I'm not sure I've totally managed it yet either, but it's a great thing to convey to managers that we've got to be okay with people's emotional expression at work. And again, that's half the battle. If someone knows it's safe to do that, they're actually going to feel better about being at work and safer. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking, AJ, but...
Articulated better than I could have. It's exactly what I would say. I think being an empathetic ear and being a good sounding board, and being honest. If you go, I don't have the solution for you, but I'm happy to support you if you need to go and explore that. But, you know, I don't have it right now. I love that at Cleveland Clinic in America, they actually have a thing called lavender bands. So, you know, those kind of rubbery bracelets you can get, they have ones that are lavender in color. And so any staff member or employee, if they're going through a challenging time, it might be their pet died, it might be that they've got some anxiety, whatever it is. If they've had a conversation with their manager, the manager will ask them to wear a lavender band. And so no one needs to know what their issue is, but other staff will see that and just be kind towards that person. They might let them into the coffee queue earlier or whatever it might be. And what they're offered is whatever kind of therapy or support they need. So maybe they've asked for seeing a priest. Maybe they want to see a counsellor. Perhaps they want to go and have yoga or a Reiki session. It really doesn't matter. The organisation just says whatever works for you. And the managers know my job is just to listen. and to be a sounding ear. So I think that's fabulous advice. And we all, as little humans, have an empathy muscle. We can do that without any skills or qualifications. And having said that, though, every manager could go and do one of the free Lifeline courses or something like that. You know, a couple of hours, some of those courses can at least just equip you with awareness to go, oh, I think some of that's going on here. Just to have that level of awareness to be able to discern what might a next step be. Not that I have to do it, but that at least I've got a level of awareness and maybe some language around it. It can be really helpful and supportive. And there's lots of things like Lifeline or other courses that managers can do all around the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think regardless of the skills of management and whether they are in tune with what's happening with their staff, I mean, I think it's a responsibility for all of us to check in on our colleagues as well, you know, in this, particularly now in this environment, and really create that sense of community where we can. I think we're just about at the end of this, and I don't know, do we have any more questions? I think everyone's pretty happy there. We might just wrap up if everybody's happy to do that. Thank you so much to Brendan and Jonathon for coming along today, and AJ for all giving us the wonderful gift of your wisdom and what's happening out there in the community and some solutions that we might be able to engage to go into the future. So thank you.
Thanks.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.